welcome to History Show number 2 for Grand Prairie, Texas. And this is November the 4th, 1985. And we have a very, very special guest with us today. And our assistant today is Joan Longorio. Joan, welcome as co-host of the show today, my dear.
Thank you, Ruth.
Wonderful. I'm so very pleased that Republic Bank would let you out of the cage long enough to come and be with us today to interview a very exciting lady that we started our interview at our very last set to. Elizabeth Preston Crabtree Meisner, welcome back to the show, darling.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Now, Elizabeth, as we are surrounded by your wonderful personality and all of the memorabilia probably in the whole world relating to the Crabtree, Preston, that you could dare to bring out of your home and onto this set. We're just so glad to now center in on you, and we both want to talk with you about your past. Why don't you start out by continuing on as you were telling us about the Preston for which Preston Center is named, and then go on into your immediate family, the names of your mother and father, and give us a little genealogy. Would you do that, Elizabeth?
Well, this Preston that we were talking about was William Gilwater Preston. And he came into Texas history because his father was a friend of Sam Houston's. And Houston, when he needed volunteers, wrote to Father James to come and help him, and so he started, and with 2 sons, George and William. But when they got down close to San Antonio, they found that the Alamo was already fallen.
Yes.
And then they went on to San Jacinto and shared in the victory there. And then the father and the son George went back to Tennessee, but William stayed. And evidently conditions on a frontier make one grow up very rapidly. For in 1840, at the ripe old age of 23, he was Captain William Preston of the Texas Regulars, stationed up here on Red River at a little place where the wagon trains came to cross. And he was to ostensibly protect the trains from Indians, but I suspect as much from our own homegrown robbers that would rob those trains if they had a chance. But he saw a business opportunity, and he left the Army and put in a ferry. It was better. And the place came to be known as Preston's Ferry at Preston's Bend. And then there was this trail that goes on down 90 miles to John Neely Bryan's town called Dallas. And so after the Republic, when it was closing, he went back to the States. I think he loved a scrap, and he joined the Arkansas Volunteers and was captain of Company H. And then after the war was over, he married Lucinda Price. No, Louisa Price. And but she didn't live long after the birth of the second child. And in '55, he remarried Sarah Ann Cameron, who was my great-grandmother. And they decided that they would cast their lot with Dallas, and they came out west of what's Cockrell Hill and was then known as the Cockrell Plantation. And, and he bought considerable land there at 50 cents an acre. And he lived there longer, I guess, than he ever lived any place. For several of his children were born there. And the first one, William, the son of William, the son of William, that name goes on back. And he became my grandfather. But in the meantime, the Civil War came on, and what did William do? You know, the tocsin sounds, he joins right up with the Confederacy. But there was a neighbor, Vernoy, and he was a Dutch immigrant, and he had a moral conviction about slavery. He had no slaves, and he just was not about to join the Confederate Army and maybe lose his life for a cause that he disapproved of. And so they looked on him as a slacker and a traitor, and they sent Preston and a few men to get him. And they got him. And they were going to shoot him the next morning. But the old family tradition is that Preston just let him get away. And anyhow, he got to the Vernoy Ranch and got a horse and went over and hid in the breaks of what we call the mountain, and you know as Chalk Hill. But the second generation doesn't fight the war quite as hard, and they say the third doesn't at all, and the fourth forgets it. But what happened? They had children, Sarah, and this first son, he grows up, and he becomes a charming, wild, rollicking cowpoke, and he goes over and marries Vernoy's oldest daughter, Cornelia Elizabeth, and this is the man, of course, that Preston was going to shoot. And I suppose it distressed both sets of parents. But anyhow, to that marriage, there were 3 sons, James, who was a farmer, and then Uncle Tom, who was a Methodist minister, my father, Roy Preston, who always made his home in Grand Prairie. But, well, he was in Oklahoma a very short time, and then toward the end of his life, he went to Arabia with Arabian American Oil, but this was always home, and he always came back here. And he brought me to live with my grandmother when I was a little more than a year old, and I am 76, and I have lived all of my life in this town except when I was away teaching, and of course I would come back in the summer, and have always regarded Grand Prairie as home.
All right, now Elizabeth, did you begin your school career here in Grand Prairie, Texas? Did you start the school here?
Oh,
And
yes.
who was your first grade teacher? Can you remember that for us? Oh, like yesterday?
Everybody remembers Mrs. J.P. Yeager.
Yes.
She taught here for years and years, and there was just one school. And I have a picture
Oh, wonderful. I know that you're going to show
Of
that to the
that.
camera.
of the school. This is the school after it was embellished. I can remember an even plainer school. This was on College Street. It's gone now, somewhat west of where the administration building is. And it had 11 rooms, and it had an auditorium.
Who was the superintendent at that time
Mr. Hudspeth, most of my years.
when you began school? Mr. Hudspeth
I
was the
don't recall
superintendent.
the first year, but most of my years I
All right.
recall Mr. Hudspeth. And we had a very limited situation, I guess. The outside plumbing, I don't think that even has drinking fountains outside. I remember when they were put on either side of that main walk. But there was an excellent school because the superintendent believed that schools were to really educate, and then excellent teachers.
All right, now did you carry your lunch, or was there a place at school where you could
We
buy your
carried
lunch?
our lunch, except there was a little store just across the street, operated by Mrs. Badgett, I believe.
All right,
where
now
you
what
could buy
direction?
candy.
What direction?
West, just across
West. Where the City Hall parking lot is located now, probably?
Just immediately west of that block, just across the street, and we were permitted to go there and buy little candies and a few things, but mainly the strength of the school was in the teachers. You know, they say that Mark Hopkins and a log will make a university. I can remember J.T. Summerhill. I had him 4 years in high school, 2 years more in college, and he used to read Shakespeare aloud to us. Can you imagine? He did it so well that he made converts out of us. And in the summer, several of the girls, we'd call each other and say, bring your book and come over and let's play Shakespeare this afternoon. Can't imagine what Macbeth on the North Porch is.
Yes. Well, could you tell us your most favorite teacher of all, Elizabeth, in all of your years
I
in school?
suppose that as far as making an impression, it was Mr. Summerhill, because he gave me a lifelong love of literature. And I'm indebted to that man to this good day. However, there was Mr. Grimes and Miss Hart, and this was strictly college preparatory. 4 years of English, 3 years of math, 2 years of science, and nobody asked whether you liked it or not. You were supposed to like it. And we just did the best we could with it.
What year did you graduate?
25.
1925. How many were you in your class?
25.
25 in the class of 25.
25.
Oh, that is wonderful. Yeah. All right, now, someone had to be the one that sparked your interest in being able to go on to further your education after you got out of Prairie High School. Tell us how that happened and where you went to school.
Well, the dominant influence in my life, of course, was my grandmother, because we were alone so much.
Give us her full name, would you, Elizabeth?
Cornelia Elizabeth, and that's where I get the Elizabeth.
Cornelia Elizabeth
Burnoy.
Burnoy. Okay.
And she said, you will go to college and you will be a teacher, because that is ladylike. There wasn't 1,000 jobs for women in back in the early 20s.
Did she raise any of her other granddaughters?
No.
How many daughters did she have?
She had no daughters.
Had
just
no
the
daughters.
3 sons.
Just the 3 sons. So weren't you the most favorite of all, being a granddaughter?
She was a very strong lady at times. I didn't feel at all favorite. I can remember the grandfather, roly-poly, finest grandfather that ever was, and we used to sit out in the porch swinging for dear life, and he had a beautiful cowboy voice, even late in years. And he would sing, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, rye whiskey, and grandmother would be at the screen door, Bill, you hush, hush, the neighbors are going to hear you. And he'd keep on swinging it, singing rye whiskey. And I just got the biggest kick out of it, because he was defying grandmother. And
now, grandmother...
Not many people did and lived over it. And
where did Grandma and Grandpa Burnoy live when you lived with them? Tell us.
Where I live now.
All right, now let's tell everyone where you live now, so they'll know that the home that you have is very, very special. And it was at one time a little shotgun type, real wonderful home.
After a fiasco in sheep ranching near High Cove, they came back here and settled in Grand Prairie. And with the last $400, started on that, buying the land and the house too.
All right, and I believe it was an acre, wasn't it?
It's the same acre.
Would you like to tell us about this warranty deed and about that property?
Well, this, if you can see it, is is a deed from Mr. Deckman. Now, Grand Prairie was known as Deckman Station, and Mr. Deckman had acquired this property in here, and this is the deed dated, I think it's 1902, which he sold to the Campbells, and then the Campbells sold this acre a little later to the Brannons, and just about a year later, my grandmother bought this acre, and that's where I live now.
All right, give us that address.
433 East Dallas Street, except we gave some of the acres when they opened. My dad was on the commission, and they opened Dallas Street so the farmers could have an easier way to come to the gins with the heavy cotton wagons.
And I believe you have some other memorabilia here that you had. Would you tell us about this?
we seem to have been strapped for money because this thing has an interesting date, 1881. And it simply, they were borrowing some money from my great-grandmother, Julia Ann Bernoy.
All right.
And then she said, she said, you're going to be a teacher.
And then what happened? Where did you go to school?
Went to Arlington when it was just 2 years and known as North Texas Agricultural College.
All right.
And I taught at different places, Grand Prairie and Irving, and was a principal at times in Arlington, and was on brief loan to the university. But I found that the classroom, that's where the kids are. A principal, he fusses with early school buses and late school buses, and the telephone is ringing, and the lunch money is lost, and the wet mittens are all there that need to be. So it is the children that appeal to me.
All right. Now, when you were teaching in Grand Prairie, Texas, your name was not Preston, and it was not. I wanted everyone to know that it was Mrs. Crabtree.
Yeah.
And tell us some of the places where you taught here in Grand Prairie. At Southside?
I taught at Southside with Mrs. Cora Speck.
All right.
She has passed on. That was the first school that was added after when the old building no longer would house everybody. I taught in Southside.
All right. I know Joan is getting so excited. Joan has not been in town long enough to know about Southside. Go ahead and ask her those questions.
Yes, I'd like to know about the school, where it was, and how many teachers there were.
Well, you know where I live.
Yes.
Well, the southwest corner of that block was old Southside. And there was just, they first built just 4 rooms there. And I've forgotten for sure the grades that were housed there. But that's where it was.
On Grand Prairie Road. Across the street from what is now Lee Middle School. Yes, that's very exciting. And she also asked you about how many teachers were at Southside. Were there 4? Can you remember any of the others?
Mr. Harris. I remember Harris and Mr. Speck. And that's 3. I don't recall the other. And you know, there are not many people of my graduating class still here. There is Mrs. Kiesler, Sembline Kiesler, and Earl Bodine, you've had to your luncheon, and then Stella Rhodey. I know that she's still here, and maybe some others, but I just don't know for sure. It's 60 years, and people move away, people die, and so I've lost track of a good many of them.
Would you tell us a little bit maybe about your association with SMU? Did you teach at SMU, or did you go to school there? Or?
I went to school there, and I had taken out 3 years to be with my baby when he came, and they had changed the law, and then you couldn't teach without a degree, so I went back to SMU. And I graduated. But I was older than most of the student body, and so I had I guess this is kind of mean. I had seen some older people who had come back to college and they'd sort of lost this stroke, you know what I mean? And,
Yes.
and so I studied, and I thought, well, I just won't be the dummy. And at the end of the year, SMU gave me the best scholarship they had. And of course, I took the master's. But then I kept changing jobs, and I'd have to qualify again. SMU graduated me 4 times.
Oh, Joan, I know you're going to be excited about asking her. She made a clue there about her son. We don't know about Elizabeth's family.
We need to know a little bit about that, Elizabeth.
Well, when I was in South Texas teaching in Laredo, I met my husband, Willis Madden Crabtree. He was a pharmacist there in the drugstore and across from where I lived. And so that's where it began. And then I married him in Laredo. And then we came up here later on in later years.
All right, you haven't given us your son's name yet. We need
Oh,
that clue and tell us
that
where he
is
is.
William, of course, the William. William Preston Crabtree, and he is down at Chance Vault. He is a senior buyer down there,
And where does he live?
he lives here in Grand Prairie and has all of his life, and I'm fortunate. He
Aren't
comes
you?
most every day to have breakfast. Of course, this pleases Mama tremendously.
Now, does
He
William
passes the house.
does William have any children?
No, he has no
No
children.
children. All right, that's going to make you the last of your generation, and possibly him the last of his generation.
The families are getting very small.
Very small, aren't they? That's very exciting. Now, you have so much memorabilia here now. Elizabeth, we're going to have to talk a little bit about this.
I want
yes.
to know about this spoon.
All
this
right.
is the most fascinating spoon.
That is a piece of what was known as German silver. It was the silver that the people had here before sterling was developed. But and this is very thin from long use. It tarnished very easily, even easier than sterling. We used to have several of these. I don't know whether you can see it or not, but it's old fiddleback. The pattern is fiddleback, and
You must tell us about this slate, would you? Hold up your
well,
slate.
of course. All of us were given slates to mark on it because paper was very, very expensive, and a kid who marked and drew like I did would use a tablet a day. And
this was your personal slate?
that was my own slate, yes.
Oh,
We had
how
a
exciting.
slate pencil, and then later chalk what came in, but it was usually used with...
Joan, ask her about this.
Oh, I know what it is.
I know what it is.
I don't know what another object is.
All right.
Talk about this,
Well,
Elizabeth.
these are cards.
And they're not the kind that you play bridge with.
No, you work with
These?
these are wool cards, and you use them for straightening the wool. When the sheep were sheared, of course, you straightened the wool, washed it, dyed it, and then you spun it, and then you wove it. And my grandmother used to tell me about having done all of that and had it all. She'd gone to the woods and found the herbs to dye with. She knew what would dye red and green and so on. And bless you, she hanked it all up, gonna set up the loom in the morning, and somebody opened the door and the whole bit was sucked into the fireplace, and she got no new wool dress that year because the rest of the wool had been sold.
All right, Joan, you better get this next one.
This is the one. This is the one.
This is, well, that's
It's a lemon squeezer.
Why, Joan, that's a lemon
That
squeezer.
has to be a lemon squeezer.
How about that?
You you see, the reason I brought it was that metal was so scarce on the frontier. There were no mines, were no foundries in this area. I don't know where the nearest ones, and metal was very heavy to bring in, and it was brought in freight wagons, so you made as much of your object as you possibly could out of wood. It worked pretty good, however, we were glad to.
Was this your grandmother's?
Yes. And
That is so very exciting.
And this, and
Oh,
everybody knows
yes.
what the old iron is.
Oh,
That
the old
was,
sad iron.
That was my iron.
It is so heavy.
And that was yours personally.
Yeah, that was my iron. It's small. You notice it's smaller than,
Yes, it
it's
is.
a child's iron. And they put the ironing board between the seats of two chairs, and I used my iron.
You ironed personally?
Well, certainly. And I ironed the napkins and the handkerchiefs for the family. And that was big stuff. And
Yes.
Put it back.
that's grandmother's tea apron.
This is grandmother's tea apron right here.
Look, that's the prettiest cut
That
work.
is lovely,
Cut
isn't
work
it?
on the front of it.
Let's see if we can redo all of this and get that up so we can. That is
How do you do
lovely.
that? I
Is that
don't-
embroidered
No, it's cut and sewed and turned. I
and
don't,
pulled like tatting?
I don't know how you do it.
Oh, that is lovely.
But I
don't
do-
know that I would put the iron or anything else on it. And
I don't know, but I know that fine needlework was a respected skill.
for young women and old women, tell us about these.
These are, as I said, my first husband was Dr. Crabtree, and he was early doctor in East Texas, and the doctors went to the sick at night and across the flooded stream and everything else. And not only did they go, but they took the medicine because there weren't too many drugstores, and there used to be lots of many fine little vials that went down in here. They've been lost out, and I rescued this from the Crabtree old home when it was sold, and I thought, because I thought the saddlebags that held the medicine vials, I keep an oil rag in it to kind of keep a little
it-
oil.
That's very exciting to, and he would carry this on horseback when he would go out and make his calls. Right.
It's the doctor's bags. They're a little different from, I suppose
Saddlebags.
saddlebags were made for different purposes.
For money and things.
And mail, large ones for
food
mail.
and Elizabeth, I know that Joan's going to ask you about this beautiful pure silk skirt that you have here.
Well, I can tell you what I was told. This is from the Crabtree family, too. And they were in Tennessee during the Civil War. And it is, I was told that it was made by slaves and that it was buried during the Civil War because many of the beautiful fabrics were cut up or made into shirts or just destroyed. So I have several things that were buried, and it's all, there isn't a machine stitch in it, but the material is just disintegrating.
Yes. Yes, it is.
But I'm amazed at the color.
Yes, it's a beautiful, bright blue indigo, isn't it? Elizabeth, of all of the memorabilia that you have gathered from the Crabtrees, which is the most treasured of all of the items that you have?
I suppose the saddlebags.
The saddlebags. Well, they're winding us down, so you're going to have to come back again later on after we do some more. Elizabeth, isn't it wonderful that you have talked with us, and we've taken up some of your time talking. And this is Ruthie Jackson ending our history number 2. And remember that history is as we do.
Come on down to Texas, let your mind